You just heard an absolutely, I think, incredible song about forgiveness. And actually, Matthew West wrote that song after he heard the story of Renee Napier. And Renee's daughter, Megan, and her best friend, Lisa, were driving home from the beach one early evening. It was kind of like a sunset time, and it was May 10th, 2002, or yeah, '02. And both of the girls were 20 years old. And they were hit by a drunk driver and killed instantly. And the young man who hit them was Eric Smallridge, and he was 22 years old, had just graduated from college, was ready to start his new life. And he was really a good guy. And he just made a lousy decision by driving drunk. And he had been drinking most of the afternoon and on into the night, and he didn't realize how badly he was affected by the alcohol. Ultimately, Eric was found guilty by a DUI killing, or for a DUI killing, and was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 11 years each, which meant that he would have been in prison for 22 years. And Megan's mom went to a place she never thought that she would go, one of anger and frustration and bitterness and hate towards Eric. And she didn't like the person that she was becoming. And so she decided that Eric was a prisoner within a prison system, so he was contained by 4 walls, but she was contained and had become a prisoner to her own emotions and feelings. And it affected her deeply with that anger and hurt. And so she realized the only way to heal herself was to forgive Eric. And so she actually contacted the prison and asked for permission to come see Eric. And it was granted to her. And I don't know if you know anything about prison systems, but the only people that get in to see a prisoner is if the prisoner themselves will say, yes, I want to see this person. And it was during that meeting that she had with Eric that she forgave him. And Eric was absolutely stunned. He couldn't even forgive himself for what he had done. And how could this mother of one of the 2 women that he had killed forgive him? Now, the story doesn't end there, because Renee and Eric began to meet on a regular basis. And Renee went out and she started to speak in schools about drunk driving. And within a few years, Renee and her family and the parents of Lisa went to the judge and requested that Eric's sentence be reduced. And it's called a beggar motion. And so a total of 11 people from both of the girls' families testified to the judge that originally heard Eric's case. And he said that he had never, ever experienced that before. And he reduced his sentence to 11 years. And in addition to that, because Eric was such a good prisoner, they allowed him to go with Renee on speaking engagements to the high schools and the places that she was going. And Eric is now out of prison. Obviously, the accident happened in '02, but they continue to speak all over the United States together to young people to let them know how drunk driving can affect not only you, but the individuals that you harm along the way. Forgiveness indeed is the hardest thing to give away. And why? Because a lot of people, it's easier to live in the past and rather than to live in the present moment. And it's easier to stay angry and hateful rather than opening up to a love, because after all, when we open up to love, we're in a vulnerable position. And forgiveness is discovering the freedom within by loving the unlovable. I loved that phrase from the song. And so why is forgiveness so important? Why does it matter in our lives? Well, the story of Renee and Napier and Eric is one example of how forgiveness frees us from the past. And when we fail to forgive, what we're really trying to do is recreate the present, because we want to go back and make whatever the experience was that we had that we were having trouble forgiving. We want to change it and make it a more loving and a pleasant experience, and that can't happen. So we're living in the past, we're not living in the present. And whenever we cling to those past grievances, we're placing ourselves in a mental prison and condemning ourselves to live in darkness. And when we forgive, it allows us to stop recycling the old story that we carry with us. And I know a lot of times we're laying in bed at night and can't get to sleep because we keep going over that situation and over it and over it. And it keeps us stuck in the anger and the hate and the blame. Paul Lewis, who is a business executive, stated that forgiveness does not change the past, but it enlarges the future. I love that. It enlarges our future. Once there were two brothers who owned adjoining farms to each other, and nobody knows why or how, but at some point they developed a bitter conflict between the two of them, and they stopped talking. They stopped working each other's farms. And one morning, the elderly son, John, had a knock at the door, and here stood a man with a toolbox. And he said, "I'm looking for some work for a couple of days. Do you have anything that I might help you with?" And John replied, "I do." And he pointed at the creek at his farm. And he says, "That's my neighbor, my younger brother's place, right over there on the other side of the creek. But last week there was a beautiful meadow there where the creek was. But, he bulldozed the area and punched a hole in the river levee so that there would be a creek that would divide us and divide our farms. And he probably did it just to spite me," John said. And he said, "You see that pile of wood over there by the barn? Well, you can go on over to that pile of wood and use that, because what I want you to do is completely build an 8-foot fence all along the creek so that I don't have to look at his farm anymore." And he asked the carpenter, he said, "Do you understand what I want and how I want you to do it?" And he said, oh yeah, I got it. And so John left to go in town for the day because he had a lot of errands to run and some meetings to be present at. And so when he returned late that afternoon, or as it was dusk, he had, he saw, instead of a fence that he had wanted, he saw a bridge. And the bridge went from his property over the creek to his brother's property. And as the farmer and the carpenter began to approach the bridge, John noticed that his younger brother, Tom, had started to walk across the bridge. And they met halfway on that bridge. And Tom, the younger brother, embraced John and said, "You are incredible to build a bridge after all I've done and said. Thank you for forgiving me." And when we open and forgive ourselves, we open to a greater space between ourselves that can be filled with love and kindness within. Forgiveness allows us to return to our true essence, which is love. It always has been love. It always will be love. It's just that the anger and the failure to forgive covers that love up. Dr. Ernest Holmes states, "If we hold a grudge, we bar ourselves from the highest expression of our divine nature. God never hates, nor does God hold feelings of bitterness towards any person. Thus, the grudge holder is trying to express God in something else, which is absolutely impossible. Spirit is not a cut up in little sections. No one is to say, I will accept God's healing, but not express God's love. Since spirit is indivisible, the person who refrains from expressing God's love will be unable to accept God's health. Therefore, we should express love, for love is fulfilling the law. We have known for many years that our mental attitude and thought process also has a profound effect on our physical condition. We need only to follow the writings of Louise Hay to know that the heart issues are about feelings of hurt and resentment. Liver issues are about not forgiving ourselves or others. Dry eyes indicate we're refusing to forgive. There are so many connections between our physical health and the mental thought process that are affected by our failure to forgive. You want to live a healthier life? Remember to forgive. Often, what we need to forgive in others is something that's really in our own being that we have refused to heal, examine, or hidden from. And when we decide to withhold our forgiveness, in essence, we have chosen to suffer. And only we can remove that suffering. Gerald Jim Plowski, in his book, Forgiveness, the Greatest Healer of All, states to forgive is to feel the compassion, gentleness, tenderness, and caring that is always within our hearts. We can look upon forgiveness as a journey across an imaginary bridge from a world where we are always recycling our anger to a place of peace. That journey takes us into our own spiritual essence and the heart of God. Would you rather feel compassion or would you rather suffer? Remember, forgiveness is discovering the freedom within by loving the unlovable. When we make that choice, that decision to forgive, it's like melting an iceberg that has lived far too long in our heart and opens us up to a new way of being. We can always find a multitude of reasons to not forgive. I'm weak if I forgive somebody else. I got to carry this grudge. If I forget someone, they'll just continue to do it and treat me like crap. And when I don't forgive you, I believe that I can control you. When we don't forgive, we keep a distance between ourselves and the person that has hurt us. In essence, it's our ego that is getting in the way of preventing us from moving to that place of forgiveness. When we refuse to forgive and push away love, we're coming from a place of ego and fear. Our ego loves to give us all the reasons why we shouldn't forgive. If we want to live a peaceful, loving, and compassionate life, we must be willing to release the obstacles that prevent us from forgiving others. Our first step is to let go of a belief that we must find someone to blame when something goes wrong in our life. When we move to that place of blame, we often find ourselves clinging again to the anger, the guilt, and the shame. That's a heavy load to carry, and blame does not bring us happiness at all. It only serves to imprison us in negative thought patterns. The next step is to let go of our fears. Often we project onto others what we perceive to be true and real in our life. Things that happen to us in childhood that are deep within our consciousness and subconscious mind have taught us. So often those deep beliefs based on childhood experiences become adult fears. Those fears become our reality. We become convinced that our uncomfortable thoughts and feelings are caused by others and situations not within our control. Logically, we know that this is not the truth. Emotionally, however, we don't want to let go of our past. We want to keep repeating it until something more happy, more loving, more kind comes along. So often we stay attached to the past because it is what we are familiar with. As a police chaplain, oftentimes I'm called out to deal with the battered wife, or out on situations where it's a altercation going on between a husband and wife. And while we offer a place to take the woman or the individual who has been battered, we offer to take them there so that they'll be physically, emotionally, and and mentally better off, because their batterer is so demeaning towards them. Initially, when I started encountering this, I would find women who would refuse to be taken away from their home, or for us to take them to a safe, secure housing situation. And I kept thinking about this, wondering, why are they doing that? And then the answer was really simple. It was their fear. They feared the unknown. Even though they were staying in a house that was filled with battering to them one way or multiple ways, they knew the batterer and what to do. If you remove yourself from that, you have no idea what's going to happen. Because we have the power to choose our thoughts, our next step means letting go of the thoughts that no longer serve us. Love returns when we shift how we think and are willing to forgive. In his book on forgiveness, Jim Plowski writes about his own transformation. He openly admitted that he truly was not a nice person in his younger years. In his 20s, he shared how he would attack and belittle not only others, but himself as well. He states that his ego was on autopilot, and when he would attack somebody, heaven help him if they were in his way. After 20 years of marriage, he divorced his wife, Pat. He felt guilty, he felt hostile, he had self-blame, and he discovered the wonders of alcohol. 2 years later, however, he discovered A Course in Miracles, and his life began to shift. His struggles with blame and guilt and shame began to release. And every day he concentrated on setting Pat in light and love. And he asked God for help in forgiving himself and his ex-wife. Soon he noticed that the tension that was once there began to melt away. Ultimately, they became good friends once again. As Gerald puts it, I surrendered to love rather than fear. So just what is yours to do with forgiveness? In Proverbs 17:9, it states, "He who forgets an offense seeks friendship, but he who hates to forget an offense estranges himself from a friend and a neighbor." It's important for us to go deep within and look at who we have not forgiven. Maybe you thought you'd forgiven someone, but the residue still remains. Excuse me. In 2015, I walked the Camino in Spain for the first time. At some place in the journey, I realized that while I thought I had forgiven the individuals involved with my dismissal from my last city job, I truly hadn't released them. So one night I made a list of everyone involved. I was really surprised to discover how long that list really was. Much, much longer than I had anticipated. Then I began the process of forgiveness. Every day I said a forgiveness rosary for a few more people. It went like this: I forgive you, John, for all that you have done. I love you, John, as I love myself. God's the love that I am. Some people I had to do a second or a third time. But by the time I had completed the list, I was free of an experience that had occurred 24 years before. It was so freeing, and I felt like a burden had been lifted from my heart. So the first thing you can do is make a list of people You may still need to forgive. Remember, forgiveness is discovering the freedom within by loving the unlovable. If you're unable to forgive the individual person because they are deceased, you can always write them a letter, but you can still do the forgiveness prayer. The choice is do you want to be a victim or do you want to be a place of love? Many of you may remember the San Francisco earthquake of 1989. There was a family who had their home totally destroyed in San Francisco by the quake. And they chose not to leave the Bay Area. And so they went to Oakland. And a few years later, a fire destroyed their home again in the Oakland Hills. They honored their feelings and forgave what seemed to happen to them. Rather than staying victims, they moved on with their lives. There will always be natural disasters. Asking why doesn't help. The answer may never, ever come. Instead, ask what? What can I learn from this situation? What can I do to move on? Make a decision to live in the present moment, not the past. Henry Lundworth had survived Auschwitz during the World War II. He had seen life at its absolute worst. Henry came to America after the war and became a successful businessman. But the one thing that he failed to do was he hated the German government so much that it possessed part of his life. Because of his business success, he decided to give back to the less fortunate. And he began a nonprofit organization called Give the Kids the World. And it was all about giving children who had life-threatening diseases a week of fun at Disney World. And his heart was transformed by working with the children and their families. Forgiveness from the Germans finally came for him. And Henry believes it's because of the love that he received from the children and their families. So it's time to forgive yourself. Often we're still carrying guilt or shame from something in our childhood. Forgiveness releases us from our self-imposed prison. Remember, you have the power to choose your thoughts and to stay in the present moment. Be clear that your only intention is to love and to have a peace of mind. When we forgive another person, we're also forgiving ourselves. The chorus in the song Forgiveness is simple. Forgiveness, 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 forgiveness. Show me how to love the unlovable. Show me how to reach the unreachable. Help me now to do the impossible. Forgiveness. Always remember, forgiveness is discovering the freedom within by loving the unlovable. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is.